This podcast is brought to you by Whisper, the digital communication platform that's changing the game for local governments. Whisper makes it easy to boost community engagement and keep citizens informed through SMS, email, social media, voice messaging, and more, all from the one platform. Better yet, it's easy to use and requires no technical skills. To find out more, head to whisper.com. That's WHISPIR.com.
Hey y'all, coming to you from Jacksonville, Florida, this is GovLove, a podcast about local government brought to you by engaging local government leaders. I'm Ben Kittelson, Senior Consultant at Tellus and GovLove co-host. We have a great episode for you today. We're talking about building standards and sustainability in Aspen. But first, the best way to support GovLove is to become an ELGL member. ELGL is a professional association engaging the brightest minds in local government. And you should mark your calendars. Our annual conference is coming up this fall, October 13th and 14th in Phoenix, Arizona. Tickets are on sale now, so you can learn more about the conference by going to elgl.org/events, and tickets are on sale at our website, elgl.org. Now, let me introduce today's guest. Tessa Schreiner is the Climate Action Manager for the City of Aspen, Colorado, and has been with the city since 2021. Prior to that, she served as Sustainability Manager for Leon County, Florida, where she managed the county's Office of Sustainability, including policy recommendations and community outreach initiatives. So with that, Tessa, welcome to GovLove. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. So we have a tradition on the podcast to do a few lightning rounds, more fun questions to let our audience get to know you. So my first question for you, what was the first concert that you went to?
Oh, man. I have two answers. The first is in my adolescent phase, which was the Backstreet Boys.
Oh.
Yeah, it was amazing. And then the second, when I really came into my own music style, which I really consider my first concert, was a Sum 41.
Oh, wow. Okay. A little bit different speeds there. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know. Backstreet Boys is one to be proud of, I feel like, as a first concert.
I mean, it's a production, those kinds of concerts where it's not just, there's just so much going on. I have very fond memories of that. It was great.
That's awesome. All right. So my next lightning round question for you. What is your most controversial non-political opinion?
Nutella is terrible.
Oh.
And it should be we should just not sell it. It should not be allowed to be sold. I don't know why. I mean, I feel like I'm the only person that feels this way. I will say it's probably because I hate hazelnuts. But I don't know. It's terrible. And I get bashed every time that I speak those words. So I stand by it though.
Yeah. I mean, we might have lost some listeners just now. That's okay. But I love hazelnuts, but Nutella is not my favorite.
Okay.
I don't think it even tastes like hazelnuts in the way that peanut butter tastes like peanuts.
Right.
It's like a completely different thing.
Right.
That's a good one. All right. So next lightning round question: what book are you currently reading?
Oh, I just started a new one, Hamnet, by I think Maggie O'Farrell. It's about Shakespeare's son. It's fiction. And I like fiction. It's a way for my brain to take a break from all the nonfiction things happening in the real world. And I love reading. But I just started it, so I have no review yet. But it's been good so far.
I'll have to check back with you and get the full review.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Then my last lightning round question. Where do you go for inspiration?
Oh, on a walk generally or outside. I think best when I am kind of doing something else. And it's hard for me when I just sit down and I'm like, okay, brain, think of things. That's hard. But when my brain, I think, is able to be a bit more relaxed and I'm doing other things, then it's when I come up with my brightest ideas. So I go on a walk, and it's nice to go on a walk in Colorado most of the year and find inspiration in the many different paths and mountains and all those things outside.
Yeah. Well, Aspen is a beautiful place to walk around in. So
It is, yeah. Although it's the first place that I've lived where I have to think before I leave the house if I need to strap spikes to my feet
yeah,
or not. Not a thing in Florida, and so that has been an adjustment. But yeah, I've adapted. My first winter,
yeah. The first one's the hardest. It's like the first summer in Florida, right? You gotta.
totally got to get the right gear
Yeah,
and just like get in the right mindset of I'm gonna be cold all the time, and that's okay.
yeah. Well, kind of on that note, I'd love to hear people's kind of paths into local government and into this work. So, for you, what was your path into local government? How'd you end up in Aspen?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would not have thought if like in undergrad that I was going to go into local government. I'm so happy that my path led there, but I studied international business. So I was pretty firmly set on going into the business world. I thought I was going to go into more of a tourism path,
Hmm.
which I ended up studying a bit in my master's. But yeah, I did an undergrad in in international business, and then really didn't know what I wanted to do next. And so I had an opportunity to move to Spain and teach English for 2 years there and kind of figure out what it is that really lights my fire.
Hmm.
And came back to do my master's in global sustainability at the University of South Florida, USF. And that was really when I discovered a little bit of local government work. I had an opportunity to do a little bit of work with some local governments, but really mostly just a path in sustainability. And I was offered the job with Leon County after my master's,
Mm-hmm.
and quickly realized that public service work was really where I was meant to be. And yeah, I love it so much. It just wasn't even on my radar when I was in school. So it's really cool how that just happened, and something that I'm really passionate about.
Yeah. Well, I think your kind of role is one of those signs where like you can do almost anything in local government, right? Like you could be interested
Totally.
in sustainability and like in science and like do that kind of work for your city or for your community. You don't just
Right.
have to like I don't know go into higher ed or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you could, especially now at this like really pivotal moment in time where
Hmm.
there's a reckoning for this work, and to really put a lot of not only effort but funding and just expertise behind it. And I mean, I've seen that evolution in just the 7 or 8 years that I've been in this space. That there's a ton more support, and there's people working on it that just had not been working on it before, which is really cool, and support that comes from unexpected areas.
Hmm.
And local governments in many ways are leading the charge in the sustainability world, and and really serving communities of need, and focusing, really using an equity lens,
Hmm.
and ensuring that we're reaching our climate goals, and centering the people in our communities that need that need to be served really the
Yeah.
most.
Hmm. Well, I'm curious, your time in Leon County, which for folks that are maybe unfamiliar with the Florida geography, it's the county that Tallahassee's in. So pretty good sized community. Um, what were maybe a couple of programs that you worked on or projects that you did that maybe you're most proud of or something that might be that folks could look to and learn from?
Yeah, there were we in Leon County. I had an opportunity to work on a variety of projects and in different departments, which was really fun for me, especially as like jumping into the local government scene as my first real full time job in local government and in the sustainability world. So things that I think back on really fondly of my time there was beginning a local sustainability collaborative with some of the
Mm.
largest organizations in the community, and historically these groups had been working in a silo and doing their own thing, some collaborative projects, but this was an opportunity to bring people to the table and say we have more work that we can do together than we can do separate, and be more successful in that.
Hmm.
So that was really fun, and yeah, it's something I really enjoyed doing. And then some other projects we worked on were composting efforts. We started in my time there the county's really first composting initiative, starting to scale up what that looks like on a bigger scale. And composting in Florida is is definitely growing, but it's not maybe as advanced as some other states in the U.S. And then, other things like updating our sustainability action plan, working on EV charging and just EV, fleet procurement, renewable energy, just, yeah. But I think if I had to like look back and say like, man, I'm most proud of that, or that was really fun, is this, working with other organizations that we hadn't historically had a relationship with in the sustainability realm, and being able to bring those people to the table was really fun.
Very cool. Well, and I know you've only been in Aspen for less than a year, but I'm curious. Like, I don't know if I were to take a map out and try and pick two places that might be more different that you can find between Aspen and Leon County. I mean, in terms of the politics, the climate, the sustainability issues that I imagine that you're facing. It's like I'm just curious, like how's your role been different? How's the role of sustainability been different between the two organizations? Like, I don't know if your focus areas are different, or just curious, like how, because that's got to be a pretty big, almost culture shock going from Leon County to Aspen.
Yeah. And I mean, if you look at the climate zones map of the United States, we moved from a very hot and humid climate to a very cold climate, like literally the opposite spectrum on the climate zones. And so, I mean, not just like, the all the things that you mentioned, which I can talk more about, but also just like the feel was so different. And then, I mean, how that relates to the different, I guess the first thing I'll say is how that relates to the different climate emergencies and challenges that we have related to climate change. So, my partner and I moved in July of 2021, and we were leaving, just as hurricane season in Florida was starting. And we were remarking about how, it's different for us that we don't have to think about hurricane season where we're going. And then we moved to, we got to the Roaring Fork Valley, to Aspen. And one of the first weeks that I was there, there was a really intense mudslide in the Glenwood Canyon.
Oh, wow.
Due to the year previous, there was a wildfire in that canyon that caused, just incredible destruction and burning of thousands of acres. And there was a huge, 100-year storm, and it caused this massive mudslide, and it closed Interstate 70 for about a month.
Wow.
Within that canyon. And so just this again, like the destruction of hurricanes to the destruction of, another natural disaster, was really just stark to me, and how different those look, but they're the same, same root cause. So that was, that has been a different shift for sure. And just talking about frost-free days in Aspen, versus, intense heat in Florida. So just that brain space of what climate work and what climate priorities look like in very different places has been an interesting just adjustment and an understanding of the wide range of the things that we're seeing as a local government. And so I would say that has been a big difference. That's been really, interesting, and just that really stark shift. And then in a more 10,000 foot view, my roles are similar with the city and the county. It's, our roles are to bring, internal departments within our own organization, and then external groups, organizations, citizens together, to advance sustainability on all of its different levels. And that is really the role of our both of those offices. So that work looks really similar. And then, you hit on this too, but just the varying politics and state support really of, Florida compared to Colorado just, could not be more different. And so that's been really fun to come into a new space and have resources and support in ways that we just didn't in Florida. So that's been really awesome and quite different. And yeah, I would say like the third difference is the priorities and desires from the community. Those are two widely different communities, and the needs of the communities are really different, and what the communities have said in Florida versus in Aspen and the Roaring Fork Valley of the needs, the pressures, the just like the urgency of action has been different, which has been an interesting adjustment. And Yeah, and I think you'd find that across, various parts of the United States as well, but certainly from the two communities that I've lived in and worked in.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. What is kind of the community's, I don't know, interest level in sustainability? What are the areas that and maybe we could turn this into a bigger um, conversation about your office more generally and kind of what guides your work. But I'm curious, kind of what is the community interest level, or what are their areas that they say the city should be focusing in on around sustainability?
Yeah, so I mean, Aspen for so many years, I mean, decades, has been a leader in the climate space and
Mm-hmm.
and that's a really cool just community to walk into. That that yeah, we've been doing this work for since before 2000,
Yeah.
and that is just really awesome. And we've had some really, as a community, some really innovative, very innovative things that have happened in the 90s and the 2000s with how we treat development. We have this thing called the Renewable Energy Mitigation Plan, or the REMP fund, where if you build if you construct a new building, new construction,
Mm-hmm.
and you want to put anything in that new construction that it will use additional energy. So let's say a jacuzzi or a spa or snow melt, like on the driveway. You have two options. You either have to mitigate that on site with either geothermal or solar, or you have to pay into this REMP fund,
Hmm.
which has raised millions of dollars over time, and those dollars are directly infused back into the community and energy efficiency work.
Cool.
And that was in the 90s.
Yeah.
And so it's like, what a cool, like, what an innovative and amazing thing. I mean, even now for many communities, that's innovative. And we've had that for more than 2 decades. So,
Hmm.
so I think the community in Aspen has recognized just at a really deep level the need for climate action work. And, there's lots of really innovative thinkers, um, with Aspen Global Change Institute, AGCI, and just that it's a really different culture, and a really supportive culture for this type of work, and that drives innovative thinking and innovative solutions. And so that really has been the theme of the community of, like, let's do big things. Like, we are a leader in this space. Let's lead.
Hmm.
And that's an amazing place to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and I imagine pushes you to go find out, like, well, what is the next big thing that we should be trying to do?
Totally. Yeah. And then to have a community, and our council right now is just not afraid of innovation, and not afraid of being, yeah, of doing things first, or
Mm-hmm.
being the, or yeah, doing things that other local governments either haven't done, or taking bold action in various ways. And yeah, that's just great.
Awesome. So, how big is the climate action office in Aspen? Like, what maybe guides your work? I know there's a climate action plan that y'all have. Is that kind of how you set up your work for the year, or kind of what your the focus areas of kind of the team? But just curious, kind of generally how the work is staffed, and kind of how you guys plan out, or what
Totally.
your focus areas are. Yeah.
Yeah, so we are lucky enough to have 3 full-time staff and 2 temporary staff on our team. So we're a team of 5, and we are housed within the larger team of the Environmental Health and Sustainability Office, which is part of the Community Development Office. And it's awesome because I will say, another difference I would note from just different local governments is how this looks in how that support comes from, or like, is the sustainability team or climate action team driving all of the climate action work in the local government, or is it deeply supported by other departments, and driven by other departments? And that's
Hmm.
really what I've noted in being in Aspen is, man, we have like an incredible different teams around the city, and within the organization, that are bringing things to us and saying, hey, have we considered this? Like, let's do this. Or, I want to make sure that we're centering sustainability and equity on this project. Like, can you support us?
Mm-hmm.
And that is just awesome, because for this to be successful, we can't be the only team doing this work or supporting this work.
Yeah.
And that's been an amazing thing, and coming to the city of Aspen has been just fabulous. I mean, we have a team of 5, but I really feel like that's much larger when you look at the
Mm-hmm.
organization as a whole. And then we're guided, yes, like you mentioned, by our climate action plan, which is a document that was most recently updated in 2017. We'll do another kind of technical update to integrate our new science-based targets this year. And those science-based targets are ones that Council has set in January of 2022. They were determined by ICLEI. We joined the Race to Zero initiative, and with that set science-based targets. So what the proportion by which Aspen needs to contribute to avoiding catastrophic climate change. So
Mm-hmm.
for Aspen, that those goals are 63% reduction by 2030 in greenhouse gas emissions in the community, and zero carbon by 2050. So those are our new guiding greenhouse gas reduction goals, and our new climate action plan, or our updated climate action plan, will infuse those and just ensure that we're prioritizing the right things to make that happen. So those are really our main kind of guiding points, our North Stars. And then we have our council set a 2-year goal in 2021 on climate, so on similar initiatives to take leadership and meaningful action in reducing our community's greenhouse gas emissions. And so we've got a lot of support behind us, and some really clear direction on where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the things that I'm always fascinated when I hear folks talk about, like, our goal is X% reduction by this year, or 100% by 2050. Like, how do you say, hey, we need to get to that? What are the focus areas that actually move the needle? So, like, is it, because I know, like, there's only so much you have control over as a local government, right? You have your own facilities and, like, fleet, and obviously, but then if you really want to reduce to 100%, you're going to have to impact the community. So I'm just curious, like, what's kind of the balance of doing things internally within the organization versus pushing kind of businesses and community members kind of in Aspen generally.
Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head that it's a balance, is that
Mm-hmm.
we have to lead by example. Like, we should not be telling the community to do anything that we haven't committed to ourselves. And so, as we begin to transition our fleet more to electric, we can serve as a leader and also a thought partner for other organizations or other local governments in the Roaring Fork Valley to help with that. Share our lessons learned, share, how we did certain things, as an example. And so I think we have to lead by example, by doing things first and learning lessons and sharing our takeaways, and how we can be a leader in that space. And then in addition to that, we certainly can't do that alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's, I think, this responsibility of government to say, at some point that, voluntary programs and education is just not enough, that
Yeah.
this is a climate emergency, and business as usual modeling is not getting us to where we need to be. And so we have to take some bolder action, and that means mandates, that means incentives, um, and some just stricter guidelines and rules in different areas. And so those are things we're constantly thinking about, of what's the right way. And I'll talk more about the Building IQ program later, but that was a great example of how that played out, so I can share more about that. So those are, I think, the things that we're constantly thinking about and balancing. And then you asked about kind of what our priority areas are,
Mm-hmm.
and those are reflected exactly in how we've set up our climate action plan. And our climate action plan is set up in how the results from our greenhouse gas emissions inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And so our emissions inventory says we have emissions coming from the built environment, which is both residential and commercial, which we've addressed directly with the Building IQ program. Emissions are also coming from our waste sector, of course, and so we're thinking of some pretty bold action coming in the next year or so to ensure that we're reducing our waste to reach those goals. And then the third is transportation, and that one is that one's a challenge, I think, for many reasons, and just how quickly the market is shifting, even now, just with supply chain issues, and how all of that looks. But we have such a small fleet, and we can help influence and do as much as we can to encourage the community, install EV charging stations to make sure that charging is accessible,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. But at the end of the day, there's private drivers and, people that come in and out of the city. And we're really trying to think about what that looks like, in the next 10, 15, 20 years,
Mm-hmm.
and how we as a government have a place in encouraging, or, at some point, some sort of mandate, or, stronger encouragement in the transition to that. But that's a huge challenge.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's like you're a seasoned podcaster. That was a great transition to my next question. the So like part of why like I reached out to you was that, I read about an ordinance that the city passed recently that kind of mandates some tracking of energy and water usage by private companies and building owners, and then eventually performance standards for that. So and that's that Building IQ program, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess to start with, can you maybe start with what the Building IQ program is and the voluntary version of it, and then we can get into kind of the changes that you guys made in the last couple months.
Totally. Yeah. So Building IQ is the name for our City of Aspen building energy efficiency program. And why we named it that is like to be smart about your building, know your
Hmm.
building, know your power. And so Building IQ is a program that has two phases. The first phase is a benchmarking phase, which is data gathering, data tracking. And so in this phase, over time, we're asking commercial property owners, city property owners first, commercial property owners second, multifamily property owners third, to benchmark their buildings' energy and water usage. And starting there, right, you can't manage what you don't measure. And
Mm-hmm.
so starting with that data, and really encouraging property owners to take ownership of their buildings or utility bills, which many of them already are. And then also providing resources, incentives, connecting them to the right people, connecting them to the right resources, to be able to be empowered to make those changes, or really smart efficiency changes over time, and just connect them with new technology as it comes out, etc. So phase one, benchmarking, and then phase two is really our carbon reduction phase, which is a building performance standard.
Hmm.
And so that piece is really exciting because we are the ninth community, I believe, in the United States to adopt a building performance standard. And so it's relatively new in this space, but there's
Mm-hmm.
this huge support and coalition of communities around the United States, but also within the federal government, and really encouraging local governments and state governments to adopt building performance standards as a method for driving equitable change and but deep carbon change in buildings in the built environment, which is the largest, for most communities, the largest sector of emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what I love about a building performance standard is that rather than a prescriptive mandate for properties, it sets a performance standard. So it says, okay, in X years, let's say as an example, in like 2035, your property has to meet this certain standard, and it looks different, right, for different properties. So what efficiency looks like for a hospital is
Mm-hmm.
going to be different than what efficiency looks like for a office building, because just really different energy usage. And so it sets a target, and those targets are set by a variety of different things. We will be setting those with stakeholders in the community over the next year, and working to develop those really specific guidelines.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just this really exciting way to say, here's where we need to go. Let's build not only a finish line and a target that we need to reach, but also this innate flexibility in that how buildings get there is very much up to what works for them over time. And what we've seen other communities do that I think really works is create, again, a flexibility to ensure that this works really well for property owners, that there's not these really strict rules just for the sake of strict rules, but also holding property owners to these standards. So some communities have created, let's say, a alternative plan. Like if a property says, I'm not going to reach the standard this year, but hey, in 2 years I'm upgrading my boiler, or whatever that looks like. There's some flexibility. So it's still, again, holding that accountability for, like, you will reach this standard, but let's find ways to build in flexibility so that it works for everyone, and that it's sustainable in all three pillars. So that I think is it's really exciting work because it's addressing the single largest emissions sector of our community, which is the built environment, and we're really thinking hard about how we provide not only financial support but also technical support in ensuring that properties have exactly the resources and help that they need in order to get there. And we're lucky enough to have a really amazing nonprofit partner in the Valley called CORE, the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. And they are helping us really deliver on building IQ. They have done this type of work for like 20 years and doing assessments, free assessments for homeowners and business owners and multifamily. They have rebates available. They have grants available. So they're incredibly well set up to support us and property owners in this. As we develop these standards, over the next year or so, and set them, we're really well positioned for creating a robust program that I think we and property owners will feel really good about.
Yeah. Well, and I definitely want to get into the standard part, but I think the transition, and you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about just generally about your work, that you might have to move to mandates. But I think I read that in a news article about this, that the program was voluntary for a few years, and
yeah,
what was it like? No one participated in the voluntary version.
Yeah, thank you for bringing me back to that. That is, I think, a really incredibly good example of just how, yes, I mean, voluntary work can be really good, education can be really good, but ultimately, in most instances, that's not going to reach our climate, goals and achieve the things we need to achieve in this climate emergency. And so Building IQ was voluntary for about a year and a half, 2 years almost. And property owners said, yeah, I mean, we're happy to benchmark. That's something we're already doing, even if they weren't doing it in the program that we have mandated, which is Portfolio Manager. It's the Energy Star program, free Energy Star program. But so there wasn't consistency in that, and then no one participated. No one raised their hand and said, okay, we'll voluntarily report to you. We'll voluntarily talk about what upgrades and efficiency looks like. And so that was a clear message to us and to council, in council's words, that we needed to do something more in order to make this, significantly more effective.
Yeah.
And so that's what they did. And council was super supportive. We brought it back to them for first and second reading in April of this year. And council said, this is what we need to be doing to reach our climate goals. And we're really supportive of this mandated program. So that was really wonderful.
Yeah. And I'm just curious, like, that's great that, like, I feel like in some organizations you get something where no one volunteers and it might just die, the program. So the fact that they're like willing to double down and say, hey, yes, let's make it mandated so that we can actually make this effective. That's great. But I'm also curious, like, what was the response from property owners where, hey, we have this nice volunteer thing, none of you guys participated, so now it's going to be mandatory. What was kind of their response?
So it's kind of incredible. It wasn't what I expected. I mean, we've been very open with property owners and the community at large about this is what we're looking at. This is the direction that we're going in, is this mandated direction. Here's what the program would look like. Do you have questions? Just sending regular updates. And I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop to get, just tons of pushback or tons of, I don't know, just any of that.
People at a council meeting or whatever.
Right. And we didn't. And what we've heard really since we passed this is property owners. I've gotten 2 phone calls from property owners or engineers, architects that they've been working with saying, hey, I have a property owner that needs to meet these standards, will need to meet these standards eventually. How they've asked us how we can get ahead of it, in this new project that we're working on them with. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like what an amazing call to get, is like, hey, we want to make sure, we want to do this before it's mandated. How can we get ahead of the ball? And then a lot of property owners that have said, we would like to be involved in the development of these building performance standards and the specifics. And, we'd like to be at the table, which again is great. Like, yes, the more engagement and more representatives, the more input that we have, the better, because we want this to be a program and a set of standards that's like fully supported by the community.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding that we have to get to our climate goals. So that's the goal. That's the final objective. But the way the program looks, the type of support we provide, the type of flexibility we provide, all of that in getting there is something that we're really looking forward to working with property owners, tenants, environmental justice groups,
Mm-hmm.
representatives from affordable housing, and like how do we build something that works for everybody, and a support structure that works for everybody to ensure that these are equitable and and reach our climate goals. So that's the feedback I've gotten is like, how do we get ahead of this, and how do I get involved? And that's like I couldn't think of a better response.
Yeah. Well, and I'm curious about like the nitty gritty of like actually implementing this, and like, so is it they just need to report data that they're getting from the utility companies? Is it how are you collecting this data and supporting them,
Totally.
or like what does that look like?
Yeah. So how this will look for us, at least how we see this in the development of the next 5 years, is the benchmarking piece is streamlined through the Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a free tool developed by the EPA. This is what it is, right? It is benchmarking. It is for property owners to track their energy, water, and sometimes even waste usage over time, and then also comparing that data to other similar properties. So
Yeah.
you can see if you're a commercial office building in this type of environment, this is how you stack up against other similar buildings, which is a very cool tool to see, just like where are we on the spectrum of efficiency. And so that is quite easy because that data will then be shared to the city of Aspen. We'll do a lot of analysis and also figure out how we can improve programs, in various ways to better serve property owners and to lift up the properties that are maybe have more, work to do or need more of our support, etc. And then the building performance standard piece, we've seen this work in a variety of different ways over the communities that have already implemented these. But one model is that, for example, St. Louis and DC are two examples of cities that have a site energy use intensity standard.
Hmm.
And so they have set let's say I don't know the exact numbers, but let's say their standard is for offices have to hit, X site energy use intensity as a goal by 2028. And so they can track that in Portfolio Manager because Portfolio Manager gives that metric, and then that's how they determine if they've hit that goal for that year. Is when the property owner shares that report, and so it can be baked into that same system, which I think is an interesting way to streamline it. And so I don't know if that is. It seems like it's certainly a good option for us to look at as we start to build these out. Not, there may be other options or other things that we could look at, but we've seen how that has worked in other communities.
Mm-hmm. And so, and I assume, are you getting like live data out of the energy portfolio, like software, or is it something that you look at, you think you'll end up looking at annually or monthly?
Yeah, for most communities, and I think this is likely the method we would adopt, at least for benchmarking. I don't know about BPS, is an annual report.
Mm-hmm.
And so a property owner goes in, and then some utilities will automatically upload utility bills for the year into the system for the property owner. And then sometimes they have to do it manually. It depends on the capacity of the utility and ability of the utility. But that's incredibly easy for the property owner, to then they just have their annual data in the tool, and then they share it. They have to report it officially to the city of Aspen, which is press of a button or two, and that's how we receive that once a year. So we'll have our first due date is for city properties, again leading by example and
Mm-hmm.
making sure that we're doing things we're asking the community to do first. So we have our due date by the end of June for all city buildings to be benchmarked. And we'll share that data openly with the community. And then the first commercial benchmarking date is December of 2022. And that's for commercial properties greater than, 20,000 square feet and larger. And so that's the first commercial due date. And it's actually, we intentionally set that due date to line up with the state of Colorado's benchmarking due date, which is also December 1st for
Mm-hmm.
all properties under their ordinance, House Bill 1286, for 50,000 square feet and larger. And so they, yeah, I mean, it's amazing that the state has set a benchmarking ordinance and then are in actually the process of developing a building performance standard for those same buildings. And so we're working with them and staying tuned with the path that they take, because that will help us in the development of ours as well.
Very cool. Well, and so I'm like, obviously you can't see the future yet, but if down the line you're noticing like trends along, this type of building isn't meeting performance standards, will you have like, hey, here's some common things that you can do to improve the energy efficiency of your building, or maybe, hey, actually we need to go work with the planning folks and and change our building code so that this kind of structure doesn't get built anymore? What do you kind of think, like down the line, some of that kind of action based on this data will be?
Totally. I mean, I think it's yes, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it can be all things, and I think this process is just inherently iterative because we can't tell the future. We don't know what that's going to look like, and there's things that we'll run into. I'm sure that we'll have to make adjustments for. So I think it's both things. And back to my comment about our awesome partner in CORE, the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. This is the work they do. So they go
Mm-hmm.
into commercial properties, let's say, and do an assessment for them, which is similar to like an ASHRAE level 2, maybe not as intense, but similar to that. And so they look at their equipment, they look at their utility bills, and then they make recommendations for, are you efficient or not, or where you could improve, what your equipment looks like, where when it's end of life maybe, and then what options you may have to upgrade it to something a bit more or a lot more energy efficient, and how that will interface with the other systems in the building. And so that, I think, again, we have that partner and that tool already, because I'm not a building or energy
Yeah.
scientist. That's not my space, and not my expertise. And so it's amazing to have a partner that are those things and have those tools and that technical expertise that are already working in the community to help with that process. So I feel like we're really well positioned, again, because CORE can help them benchmark and already help them look, to the future for, those preparing for those performance standards and where they may be able to make improvements.
Fascinating. Very cool. And obviously you have to start somewhere. So large buildings makes sense, especially because those are probably the most energy intensive. But do you think this kind of program will roll out to, single family homes, which I imagine might be a greater percentage of your building stock in the city? Or what do you think the future of that is?
Question. It's such a good question. I think it's something that, it's definitely something that we've been talking about, really just to see what are the realities of reaching our carbon goal, right?
Yeah.
And we won't reach our 2050 carbon goal of zero carbon without including everyone and everything, right? We can't just ignore various sectors, just because. And so I think that for us, this is a big step, but it's, the first phase of what I think how this program will shift over time. It's a little less than 30 years until that 2050 goal. I imagine the program will evolve and grow and shift, in an effort to get there. And so, so right now, single family isn't on our radar, but I think once we take a deeper look in some of our forecasting and modeling for how, the different pathways we can get to reach our goal, it'll certainly be part of the discussion. And, it's something that we may bring up at a later date.
Very cool. Well, and if any of our listeners want to learn more about your Building IQ program, we'll link to your website. Is there anything in particular that you would steer folks towards to learn more about this program?
Yeah. So, on our city website, which, thank you for adding that link, we have now, and we'll have even more later, just information about the program itself, the policy, various things. And then I would definitely point you over to CORE's website, because they have just a ton of the technical resources and more of that educational piece for benchmarking and BPS. And yeah, so I would say for both, to look at those for for various information.
Yeah, cool. Well, and I kind of want to go back to something you mentioned a couple of times in our conversation. You talked about kind of using an equity lens and making sure you're doing kind of some of the sustainability through, with equity in mind. So how has the city kind of approached that and your team approached that? Like, what is doing sustainability with an equity lens look like?
Equity needs to be the lens with which we do all of our programs in the city. So climate action programs and everything else. And we have been looking at different ways of how we make sure that we do that, and we are setting an example and using a framework that works for us, and that ultimately delivers services, lifts up, empowers communities that have been historically marginalized, communities of colors, communities of color, low income communities, etc. And just making sure that we're serving them in a way that helps improve quality of life, and also centers voices that have not historically been centered. And so something that we are really excited about this summer is that we were selected as a host city for an equity fellow through the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, or USDN. So we will have an equity fellow this summer for a 12-week program, and we've set that scope of work for that equity fellow as broad, but as a starting place is how can we listen better and create a more equitable process for engagement, not only in our climate work, although that's a place to start, but also as a city at large. And so one of the first things the equity fellow will do will be to host community listening sessions with our Latinx communities and other communities in the valley that have historically not been listened to as well as we need to be listening to them. And so I'm really excited about that as just a starting point of like, okay, ground zero, we need to listen better, and we need to center all of our work in those voices, and building better programs, because we shouldn't and we can't think of everything. And so how do we, from the ground up, design things with our community members who have amazing ideas, and we need to be listening to them more. So that's really a starting place for us. And not to say we haven't done this work before, but we're really rethinking what that looks like. And I mean, it comes as no surprise. This is not just an issue for Aspen, but we have an incredible issue with housing affordability right now, and just cost of living in general. And there's not, because Aspen's in a valley, the Roaring Fork Valley, there's more, it's limited on where people can spread and go and move. There's not like a metro area like maybe some other cities. And so that is an absolutely massive challenge for us, and just everything, just quality of life, and transportation. It affects so much. And so we're having some really good conversations as a city about affordable housing and sustainability and the nexus there, but also just how how we start to reckon with these this nexus of huge issues in our community that are all interrelated and have different but also overlapping solutions, and just how we begin to find solutions that work for the community on those things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can see how these things could interlock if you want them to be, or if you want to. But like, I think affordable housing might be a good example where, it's such a problem now, right? That, I think I've read or followed other things in Aspen where, the city has to subsidize housing for employees to be able to live like close enough to town to at least commute in.
Right.
And so like, I mean, when you have that bad of an issue, like it's almost like how do you not focus on that versus some of these other areas? I think it can be difficult to prioritize, right?
Right. It can. I mean, it's definitely difficult to prioritize, and I think that there are shared solutions. And so, for let's say building IQ as an example, that we have we're really starting to think about how we prioritize resources for affordable housing, for example. So as we should not leave affordable housing out of these efficiency standards, because efficient buildings are healthier buildings, they're the lower cost buildings for tenants. I mean, there's a ton of benefits to, high performing, efficient, healthier buildings. And so how do we bring, affordable housing in the fold and also, account for the appropriate support, to make that an equitable process. And so, and then also, the goal, right, would be that affordable housing is, has low cost utility, has, excellent, air intake and airflow and a healthy environment to be for when we get wildfires, or really cold days. I mean, there's a lot of nexus there and how we can make affordable housing, a really, just the benefits of sustainability and affordable housing and making sure that we're doing both at the same time.
Yeah. It's keeping, affordability and equity in mind as you're setting, a standard that might impact that, right? If you raise your building standards and don't think about the cost to build, then you're making buildings more less affordable, right?
Exactly. And that's I think of all the there are many communities working on performance standards around the United States right now, which is wonderful. We're in such good company, and it's also nice to have such an awesome cohort of other cities and states that are grappling with the same issues. We're not unique in this area. That like this, these are issues that are felt by almost every other city and state that we've talked to, and that just it highlights the need for action and also allows for this amazing opportunity to be innovative and collaborative together, and take lessons learned of successes in other communities to apply them in different areas. So that's going to be in the development of our performance standards and in the work that we're doing in general in climate is how do we center equity in a way that we need to reach our climate goals, and we absolutely need to make a more equitable community and just create equitable outcomes in all of the programs that we do.
Fascinating. Well, awesome. So for, other than this Building IQ program, which is obviously really cool and will take up a lot of your attention, is there anything else that you're working on that our listeners should look out for? Anything kind of next up on your plate?
Yeah. I mean, we've always, I feel like, got juggling, a variety of programs at once. Our council has has indicated an interest in looking deeper at organic waste and reducing organic waste, and then also reducing construction and demolition waste, so C&D waste. So that's something that our awesome team is working on in that space right now. And then again, back to kind of our greenhouse gas emissions pie chart, right? We're working in just every single area that we possibly could to reach our climate goals, and transportation is one of them. So we're electric vehicle charging is something that's on top of mind right now, as well as transitioning our fleet. And then you may have read, but Aspen passed a residential moratorium for new permits, et cetera, to take a step back and a hard look at our land use code, our permitting system, and how we can, again, make that more sustainable and better serve the community. And so there's some exciting things that we're discussing as a part of that, of just like, how do we improve this system? How do we, yes to development, and also yes to climate action work, and and local initiatives, and I mean, again, we're not the only community thinking about those things, but the moratorium was a pretty big deal when it passed in December, as a very legitimate stopping point of, we can't build this plane and fly it at the same time. We have to pause for us to really take a hard look at what this process looks like, and how we can, plan a better system, to serve our community. So that I would say maybe is number one of the exciting things to look out for are the initiatives that come out of that moratorium.
So is the intention to change like the types of buildings that are being built to increase density kind of in town, or is we're not sure yet?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not sure yet. I think the idea is, again, like many communities, the rate and type of development is has not been sustainable in Aspen, and the rate of development, the rate of demolition and scrape and and put another building there has just seen a tremendous uptick, as well as the moratorium addresses in a kind of a separate bucket, but short-term rentals. And so again, the things that other communities are also dealing with, but have been highlighted really in Aspen the last 2 to 3 years, especially during and after the pandemic. And so the question is, how can we make this work better for the community and and be a more sustainable process, not only on the development side, like the rate of development is not sustainable right now on multiple levels, but also for climate action side is how do we reach our climate goals in this environment? And so those are the big kind of existential questions, I guess, that we're asking. And then the specific changes and action items that come out of it are still being determined and will be finalized late summer, early fall. But just the conversations that are happening, and again, we have an incredible community development department and so many people working on this, and just climate is one of the top not only reasons that the moratorium was passed, but also one of the drivers for change. And that's just awesome. It's been a really incredible process to be a part of, and I'm excited of what's to come.
Well, cool. We'll have to stay tuned for that, or check back with the city once the moratoriums once you guys have made those changes.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, cool. Well, our traditional last question on the podcast is, if you could be the GovLove DJ, what song would you pick as the exit music for today's episode?
Oh man, that's a tough question.
It's always the hardest one, I think. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, while I'm thinking, what have other people said? I want to hear what the
oh man, it runs the gamut. Sometimes it's people's favorite song of the moment, their pump up jam. It could be something that's related to the topic or their work. Lots of people have chosen the "We Built This City." I feel like that's probably the most common of all the songs, but it's really up to the guest.
I love that. Okay, I will choose the song "Give It Hell" by Yumi Zuma, because I really think climate work in this just in this day and age and all days and ages, I guess, but just requires us to give it hell. I mean, it is not easy work, and it is so important. So "Give It Hell" by Yumi Zuma would be my outro.
I like it. I thought you were going to tie it back to Backstreet Boys there, but that's probably better. Yeah.
Oh, a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Tessa, thank you so much for coming on Talk With Me. That ends our episode for today. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your experience.
It was awesome chatting with you. I really appreciate it. And look forward to catching up soon.
Cool. Yeah. And for our listeners, GovLove is brought to you by engaging local government leaders. And the best way to support GovLove is to become a ELGL member. You can reach us online at elgl.org/GovLove, or give the GovLove a follow on Twitter at the handle @GovLovePodcast. You can subscribe to GovLove on your favorite podcast app. And if you're already subscribed, go tell a friend or colleague about this podcast. Help us spread the word that GovLove is the go-to place for local government stories. And with that, thank you for listening. This has been GovLove, a podcast about local government.
So pretend